We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Gemara and Meseches Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 10b. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked, according to Rabbi Shimon, we should say that the sor of Yom Kippur, that's the sor hanasa b'chutz on Yom Kippur, maybe it should be mechaper on the scenario which also the seirei regolim are mechaper on, which is a situation of Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav, where there's no yediyah whatsoever, there's no knowledge of the Tumah whatsoever, not betchila, not at the beginning, and not besof, not at the end. And so the Gemara said, well, it says in the pasuk achas by Yom Kippur, and therefore since it says the word achas, it means it only provides its one kapara. It doesn't provide a kapara in a different scenario. But the Gemara asked that the word achas is not written by the sor hanasa b'chutz on Yom Kippur. It's actually written by the sor hanasa b'fnim on Yom Kippur. And the Gemara continues and answers. It says in the pasuk milvad chatas hakipurim, and we understand from that pasuk of milvad chatas hakipurim v'iskish chitzon lipnimi. We understand that there's a comparison between the sor hanasa b'chutz and the sor hanasa b'fnim. And so even though that achas is written by the sor hanasa b'fnim, we have a comparison to the sor hanasa b'chutz, and that tells us again that the sor hanasa b'chutz, it's only mechaper in its particular scenario. Again, that's talking about a scenario where there was yediyah in the beginning and there was no yediyah, where there was no yediyah in the beginning and there was yediyah at the end. That's the case of the sor hanasa b'chutz. That's the only thing that it's mechaper on. It is not mechaper on the scenario of the seirei regolim, which is when there's no yediyah whatsoever. Again, we learn that out from the word achas and the fact that there's a comparison between chitzon and panimi. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Mishmo. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, he says in the name of Rabbi Shimon. This is a different version of Rabbi Shimon. In this version of Rabbi Shimon, the idea is as follows, that when it comes to the soyer of Rosh Chodesh, that's only mechaper on its particular scenario, which is a case of a tahar that eats tameh. Then you have the seirei haragolim, that's actually mechaper on its scenario and on the scenario of Rosh Chodesh, meaning it's mechaper on the scenario of Rosh Chodesh, which is tahar that eats tameh, and it's also mechaper on its own scenario where there's a case of Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav and no yediyah whatsoever. And then you have the sor hanasa b'chutz on Yom Kippurim, that's mechaper on its own scenario where there's no yediyah in the beginning and there is yediyah at the end. And it's also mechaper on the scenario of the seirei regolim and also mechaper on the scenario of the seirei deroshe chodashim. And the Gemara asks, Ma'ishna deroshe chodashim. Now, what's the difference that by Rosh Chodesh, the lo mechaper ad regolim? There you're saying that the sor of Rosh Chodesh is not able to affect the kapara for the situation of the regolim where there's no yediyah whatsoever by Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav. And why are you saying that? The Yomar Kratz, because the pasuk says avon, it says for its sin by Rosh Chodesh, and we say avon echad hu nosei v'eino nosei shnei avonos, that the sor of Rosh Chodesh can only carry that one sin. It cannot give an atonement for two sins, for any other sins. But why don't we then say the drasha in the opposite direction? The regolim nami lo nechapra the Rosh Chodashim. We should say the seirei the regolim, they should not be mechaper on the scenario of Rosh Chodesh by tar that eats tameh. The Yomar Kra, because the pasuk says osa. That's a pasuk by Rosh Chodesh. It says the word osa for it. Osa hu nosei avon ve'ein acher nosei avon. Means to say that it's able to carry its sin, but something else is not able to carry its sin. That which Rosh Chodesh, the seirei Rosh Chodesh are mechaper for, only the seirei Rosh Chodesh are mechaper for, and nothing else can be mechaper for that. But yet we're not saying that. We're saying that the seirei regalim are mechaper on the scenario of Rosh Chodesh. And the Gemara answers to that, osa lo mashmalei, to Rabbi Shimon. In this version of Rabbi Shimon, the word osa, he doesn't darshan in that fashion, and therefore you don't have that drasha. Therefore the seirei regalim are mechaper not only on their own scenario, they're mechaper on the scenario of Tumah of Rosh Chodesh as well. And the Gemara continues and asks along the same lines, Ma'ishna de regalim, what's the difference that the seirei regalim, the lo mechaper ad Yom Kippurim, they're not mechaper on the scenario of Yom Kippur. The Yomar Kra, because the pasuk says achas bashana, it says once a year, by Yom Kippur it says that, and the idea is that kapara zu lo te'ela achas bashana, this kapara of Yom Kippur, again by the sor hanasa b'chutz, which is talking where there's no yediyah in the beginning and there is yediyah at the end, it's only going to happen once a year, and so therefore the seirei regalim are not going to be mechaper on that scenario. But if so, the Yom Kippurim nami, let's go the other direction. Yom Kippur as well, lo nechaper ad regalim, it shouldn't be able to be mechaper on the scenario of the regalim where there's no yediyah whatsoever, because again achas ksiv, because again it says the word achas, it says once, and the idea is kapara achas mechaper, it can give one kapara, ve'ino mechaper shtei kaparas, it shouldn't be able to give two kaparas, it should be limited just to its own kapara. And the Gemara answers to that, achas lo mashmalei. Again, we'll say according to Rabbi Shimon, that kind of drasha of achas, which would limit the amount of kapara that the sar hanasa b'chutz can do on Yom Kippur, that's not mashma to Rabbi Shimon to make that kind of drasha within this version of Rabbi Shimon. But the Gemara continues and asks, Amai, but why would that be true? You're going to say the reason why Rabbi Shimon doesn't want to darshan that achas in this fashion is because really the word achas is technically written by the sar hanasa b'fnim. It's not written by the sar hanasa b'chutz. But if so, the regolim nami nechavra ad Yom Kippurim. Now you've removed achas completely, so it should go the other direction. The regolim, the seirei regolim, should be able to be mechaper on the scenario of Yom Kippur. Techiksev achas b'sar hanasa b'fnim ksiv, because the word achas is written by sar hanasa b'fnim, and we should essentially completely ignore the word achas. It has nothing to do with our discussion by the sar hanasa b'chutz. And so the Gemara instead answers liolam achas ma'ashmalei. Actually, according to this version of Rabbi Shimon, really we are darshaning the word achas. And so if we're darshaning the word achas, again, it should go in both directions. Just like the sirei regalim cannot be mechaper on the scenario of Yom Kippur, the sar hanasa b'chutz should not be mechaper on the scenario of the regalim. But the Gemara explains, v'shani hacha, but it's different over here. The Amar Krab, because the pasuk says, v'chiper Aaron al karnosav achas b'ashana. It says that Aaron on the corners of the mizbeach, that's talking about the corner, the inner mizbeach, there's going to be a kapara once a year, and we understand that to mean karnosav de mizbeach hapnimi. Only the corners of the inner mizbeach, hanasa bifnim, hu de kapara achas mechaper. That's where we say that it's only one kapara. Veino mechaper shtei kaparas, and it cannot offer two kaparas. Hadechitzon, but when it comes to the soyer hanasa bachutz, afilu shtei kaparas. There it could even be two kaparas. That's why there's able to be more than one kapara when it comes to the soyer hanasa bachutz. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ula says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Tamidin, when it comes to the Tamidin, these are the public karbanos, Shalo Hutzrachu Letzibur, let's say they're not needed for the public. The point over here is they weren't needed that particular year that they were sanctified. So Niftin Tamimim, so then they're able to be redeemed even though they have no blemish. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Yasif Rabba V'kamar Lola Hashmait. The Rabba was sitting and he said over this teaching of Rabbi Yochanan that the karban tamid, the public karbanos, they can be redeemed even without a blemish. Amarle Rav Chisda said to him, he said to Rabba, Man sayis lachul Rabbi Yochanan Rabba, who's going to listen to you and Rabbi Yochanan, your Rebbe, about this? V'chi kedusha shebehen laichan halcha, where does the kedusha go? How can you redeem something, an animal that's set to be a karban? How can you redeem it if it doesn't have a blemish? Amarle said to him, Atlo tizbra, but don't you also agree? Delo amrin on kedusha sheben laichan halcha, that we don't say that argument, that where did the kedusha go? We find by the ketores that we do the same kind of redemption. V'atanan, but we learned in a Mishnah, Moser ha-ketores, let's say you have leftover ketores. Again, the ketores was not needed for that year. Maha yuosin, but what did they do with it? Mafrishin mimeno schar hom, then they would separate from it the amount of wages of the artisans, those who actually made the ketores. Umechalin osa al mos om, then they would then redeem it on the money of the umnin. V'nosnin osa umnin b'schar, they would give it to the umnin as their wages. V'chozrin v'lochen osa mitruma chadash, and then they would go and repurchase it with the truma chadash, with the new money that was donated to the Beis HaMikdash. Essentially, they would redeem that as well. And so the Gemara says, V'yamai, now why does that work? Nema kedusha shebehen lahechan holcha. How do you redeem it? Where does the kedusha go to? Amarle said to him, Ketores ko'amrit, you're trying to bring a proof against what I'm saying from the Ketores. Shani Ketores, it's different by the Ketores. And Rashi explains, Tamidim shalahutzrachu letzibur, again, this is the statement of Rabbi Yochanan when you have the karban tamid, the public karbanos that the tzibur does not need. What this is referring to as follows, Shalakacha mimos trumas halishka. They have money in the trumas halishka, that's money that's donated to the Beis HaMikdash for this purpose. Utnan, and we learned in the Mishnah, in Pochsen mishisha taloim hamevukarin, belishkas hatloim, uchshemagia rosh chodesh nisan, lo hayu makrivin shuv karbanos tzibur, mimos hatruma shalashtake. The general rule was, when Rosh Chodesh Nisan would arrive, you wouldn't bring any karbanos tzibor from the money from last year. You had to use this year's money, so you have leftover animals that you're not able to use. Kedamar b'Meseches Rosh Hashanah, like we say in Meseches Rosh Hashanah, chodesh b'chodsha chodesh v'havei karban mitruma chadasha. When that month comes, you have to bring the karban from the new truma. V'nimtzu b'chol shana v'shana arba tzloim b'lishkas hatzloim mimos hatruma yishana. Comes out that there would be 4 sheep in the lishkas hatzloim that was really from the money of the old money that was given. That's what it means. It's not needed for the public. Lahakriv b'shana sha'avra. You didn't need it for the last year. You have these leftover animals. What are you going to do with these leftover animals? And Rashi continues, Niftin Tamimin. So then again, Rabbi Yochanan said that these animals that are left over from the previous year, they can be redeemed even though they have no blemishes. Lachshiran b'shanazu, in order to make them fit for this year. Mechalin osan al moschul. And what you do is you redeem them on money which is not kodesh. V'yosam hamos yelchu l'moser hatrum yishana she'osan mehen rikue pachem tzipoy lebeis kodesh hakadoshim. That money is used for the gold plating for the kodesh kadoshim. That's what you use that money for. Kidatanav Meseches shkalim. All of that is taught in Meseches Shkolim. The Kevan sheyatzu lechulin. Now that you've taken these animals, which again, these were the animals from the previous year, you've taken that kedusha off the animals. Now they're chulin again. So chozrim velochem osam. You go ahead and you repurchase those animals. Mimos truma chadasha, from the new money that just came in for this year. V'yikruvu b'shanazu. That way you can bring these animals in this particular year. And Rashi continues, V'yafal gav she'in behemas kodshe yochin mischalelos below mum. Now, even though generally speaking, an animal that is consecrated by an individual as a carbon is not able to be redeemed without a blemish. Kedekayim alon, like we've learned, mive'im kol behema tameya de'amar mar v'balei mumin sheniftu hakosim medaber. The Gemara says we interpret that pasuk as talking about with a blemish, but elu shel tzibor niftim. But here, where it's a public, where it's an animal for a public carbon, it can be redeemed even without a blemish. Well, the kami mefarish time. Later on, the Gemara is going to give the exact reason for that. Uvelo chulin yefshar lifdoson mimos truma hachadasha. Now, if you don't have chulin, meaning if you're not going to redeem it and take the kedusha off, you're not going to be able to use the new money. Shein hektish mischal al hektish. You can't have hektish be mischal on hektish. So therefore, again, you have to take the kedusha off the animal, and then you use the new money to repurchase the animal in order to put the kedusha back on for this particular year. And Rashi concludes, Hamilsa nakat hacha. The whole reason why we're talking about this over here, it seems irrelevant to the topic of the Gemara. The reason why this is mentioned over here, mishum demosve lekaman mimasnisim, because we're going to ask later on, and we're going to bring in the Mishnah. Kedusha shebohen. And so then the question was, how is this possible? If there's no blemish, where does the kedusha go? Kedushas haguf. This is a kedushas haguf. Shebohen. That's among them. Kedushas haguf means that it's meant for the mizbeach. It's not simply something that's donated to the Beis Hamikdash for the repair of the Beis Hamikdash. Tekimlon she'enan mischalelos below mum. The halacha is that you're not able to redeem something with kedushas haguf if it doesn't have a blemish. So heichan halcha. So therefore, how does the kedusha leave if you're not able to redeem it? And so the response was, Viad lo tizra, but you don't agree to v'midi detzibur, that if it's something that's relevant to the community, to the public, lo amrin kedusha sheben leichan halcha. We don't make this argument that the kedusha is not able to leave. Heichad dechilot tzorach takana, because here there is a tzorech, there's a need for it, and so therefore you're allowed to do this kind of redemption. And he argued that we see that from the ketores, we see that from the Mishnah in Shkolim, which is about the ketores. Moser haketores, you had leftover ketores. Hanoser b'chol shana mitrum yishana, it was left over every year from the old money, from the old donations. So what would they do with that? How would they be able to make it good that it could be used for the coming year? Because again, you can't use the previous year for this year. Every year you'd have some extra. If it was impossible to use it all on Yom Kippur, and so therefore you would have some extra. And so therefore, again, what do they do with that extra ketores? Then Rashi says they would separate from it the wages that were going to be paid to the artisans who made the ketores. Mitrumas halishka, they would take some from the trumas halishka schar umnei beis avtinas mefatme haktoris. This was to pay the umnim, the artisans in the house of Avtinas, the family of Avtinas. They were the ones that made the ketores. The Yamar Meseches Yuma shall you notlan b'chol shana shnei mesrei manim. It said that they took a certain amount to pay. Umechalin oso al schar mos umnin. Then you would take the ketores and you would redeem it on the money that was going to be paid to the umnin. Mizakin hamos leumnin al yedei echad min hagizborim. They would be mizakin the money to the artisans through one of the treasures of the Beis Hamikdash. V'areihin chulin. Then that would become chulin. V'achar kach yechalu haketoras aleim. And then they would redeem the ketoras on that. V'nos the nosal umnin. They would then give the ketoras to the umnin. V'hareihi chol. And at that point in time, the ketoras was now chol. It was not considered kodesh. V'chozrim v'lochem osam mitrum chadash. And then they would go ahead and repurchase it from the new money. That's how they now made the ketoras was able to be used for the new year. And this was a more private way of doing it. They didn't want to sell it and then go repurchase it to zila mil, so that already would be something degrading for the ketores. So that's why they did it in this fashion, so to speak. They did it all internally. And so you see by the ketores also, you were able to redeem the ketores. So the reason is because it belonged to the tzibur. The same thing should be true by the public karbanos. Name a kedusha sheben leichan halcha. Why don't we say over there, where does the kedusha go? And Rashi explains the sal kadai, because right now we think shamachtesh es kli sharesu. The machtesh machteshes, which was used to make the ketoras as a kli shares. V'kevan dekadshel la bechli, and since it was sanctified in a vessel, havel kedushas haguf. Right now, the Gemara thinks that's a kedushas haguf. V'ilu midi diyachid shekidish bekli, ein lo pidyon. If it belonged to an individual, if it wasn't a tzibor, if it wasn't an item of the tzibor that was sanctified in a vessel, it would have no redemption. So again, you see that the fact is, by the tzibor it is different, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph.